This is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. First, though, our top stories this evening. 2 EU ministers have told Sky News that David Cameron has asked for a 13-year emergency break on migrant benefits as the Prime Minister holds crucial talks about Britain's relationship with Europe. Pope Francis has criticised the US presidential hopeful Donald Trump, saying his views on immigration are not Christian. And dozens of convicted murderers could now appeal their sentences following a Supreme Court ruling on a controversial law called joint enterprise. Well, let's just check in with our political editor Faisal Islam in Brussels about how those EU talks are doing. What's the update from you then, Faisal?
I'd look at this link, which is potentially quite toxic for David Cameron's renegotiation between the migration crisis and the Brexit crisis, if you like. In the 5th floor of the building behind me, there's a dinner of the EU leaders still ongoing, discussing not the British renegotiation, but discussing the migration and refugee crisis. That's going on. It could go into the night. They're using that time, they're not discussing Britain. In the meantime, it turns out at the beginning of the Brexit discussion, David Cameron significantly upped his ask, hardened his position on the emergency brake for welfare, designed to slow down EU migrant access to Britain. He said 13 years, a 7-year initial period plus 2 3-year extensions was what he wanted because of the negative press and the negative reaction to the draft deal back in Britain. So he needed to come home with more. When he went round the table, actually some sympathy about keeping Britain in the European Union. But guess what? Some of the nations from the Med said, well, do you know what? We have a crisis too, and we need help solving our crisis. So a link there, not definitive, could ebb away over the course of the night with these bilateral negotiations. But that is not helpful for David Cameron's efforts to try to solve this problem. The interlinking of these two issues is a bad development. Still, they hope with enough will in the room, they can get some sort of deal tomorrow, but they're already having to delay the discussions tomorrow by an hour or so. So it will be tough to grab that deal and for David Cameron to go back tomorrow to Britain and hold that cabinet meeting. There's still much to play for here in Brussels. Anna.
Faisal, many thanks. More from you, of course, throughout the evening. Well, let's take a look at the papers. The EU story is dominating many of them. In the next half hour, we'll take a look at the headlines for tomorrow with the historian and author Alex von Tunzelmann and the associate editor of the Mail Online, Jake Wallis-Simons. Good to see both of you. So, the front pages then. The Daily Telegraph says 80% of Britain's biggest companies will vote to stay in the Union, regardless of the deal the Prime Minister gets in Brussels. The Metro also reporting on those negotiations, saying David Cameron has promised to walk away if his demands over benefits and sovereignty aren't met. The Guardian describes the talks as the biggest gamble of the Prime Minister's premiership. It says EU leaders have warned Mr Cameron that he will only get one chance to strike a deal. That's the story for the Times too. It says the PM's European counterparts have joined together to insert a last chance clause so Britain can never be allowed to reopen talks. You can't win, Prime Minister, is the Daily Express's message to David Cameron. It's demanding that he put aside what it calls his personal love affair with Europe and he's honest with the people of Britain. The Daily Mail is equally critical. It describes the PM's deal as a watered-down shambles and says Eastern European leaders are insisting that curbs to foreign workers must be phased in gradually. In other news, The Independent has a special report from Syria and the impact of Russian airstrikes on rebel targets. 30 years of unsafe murder verdicts is the Eye's headline. It says dozens of inmates will see their jail terms cut following the Supreme Court ruling. The Daily Mirror says that more than 600 prisoners locked up under joint enterprise for being present at deadly attacks could now appeal. The European Central Bank is to adopt a more aggressive approach to boost flagging growth in the EU. That's the lead for the Financial Times. And The Star has a story about dangerous flesh-eating fish that's apparently making its way to Britain. Well, there we are. Anyway, yes, don't look too closely at that one. I think probably. Exactly. Safe to say the vibe from Brussels is not quite as positive, perhaps, as Downing Street had wanted, and that's something the Daily Mail picks up on tonight.
That's right. I mean, this, that's not a happy man, is it? Poor old David Cameron there. This story really is all about this emergency brake idea. The fact that David Cameron is trying to dampen the incentive for migrants from the EU to come to Britain by reducing the amount of benefits they're able to get when they arrive. And the thing about this is that it's just a sticking plaster for a cardiac arrest. It's not going to work. What Britain wants are borders that are sovereign and controlled, whereby we can be in control of how many people come in, how many people come in from the EU and from outside of the EU, what their skills are, the sorts of people that we want, sorts of people that we don't want. It's not a big ask, really, you would have thought. But when it comes to the EU, it clearly is, because the best that David Cameron has managed to do is this emergency brake, which may be, it may last for 4 years, it may last for 7 years, it may last for 13 years, but has to be approved by the European Union first. It may be approved by the European Commission, which are unelected bureaucrats. It may be the European Council, but either way, he has to make a case, if he wants to apply this brake, to Europe and get them to agree, and that is unlikely to happen. It's not really an emergency brake. I mean, if you're in a car that's out of control and you have to negotiate with all the people in the car before you can apply the brake, that's not really an emergency brake.
But what you're asking for, control of our borders and who comes in, that is a massive deal for Europe, because the freedom of movement is one of the mainstays of the deal that was done to make the European Union what it is today. And that is not negotiable, as we've heard throughout
That's right,
process.
and that really is the problem. It's why,
why the deal is a fudge.
Well, yeah, why the deal is a fudge. And why the Prime Minister's approach towards securing our borders is totally defunct, because what he's trying to do is take away one incentive, which is the in-work benefits which migrants can get when they come here. Now, for a start, 85% of migrants do not claim in-work benefits anyway. Secondly, it's only one incentive. We've got coming down the line the living wage, which George Osborne is going to be introducing, which is going to be a £9 an hour living wage, which is going to be one of the most generous in the OECD. If that proves to be a greater incentive for EU workers, they will come here regardless of the fact they're not going to get in-work benefits. And so those sorts of things, there'll be no protection against them. And I worry that this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to renegotiate our relationship with Europe, and by fobbing us off with the sticking plaster, I think we're in danger of...
We haven't even got the sticking plaster yet,
have we?
Let's be honest.
That's right, that's right.
I think those talks are going to get rumble on for a long time. Migration they're on now, after this working dinner. They'll come back tomorrow to talk more about the Brexit deal. But the FT talking about this too, isn't it? Cameron calls on Europe's leaders to adopt a live and let live approach to the UK. So let us be in it, but not, truly part of it, I suppose.
That's right, yes. I mean, live and let live, to me, the European Union is dying. And so to come out of the European Union would be a better option, which would be live and let die.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about this is we haven't even started on the substantive discussion of whether we should stay in or out.
I think the discussion has been incredibly unsubstantive so far, and actually I feel very disappointed that there isn't a stronger case being made for what the benefits actually are of staying in the EU. I mean, there seems to be a lot of talk about the migrant problem, which, first of all, I'm not actually convinced is as big a problem as is quite often reported. I think actually migration is something, first of all, which is very hard to control in the modern world. Second of all, which is actually part of a free market, which actually a sign the free market is working quite healthily, is the free movement of labour, aside from possibly being a fundamental right within the European Union. We have a lot of our British people have migrated overseas, 3 million of them, I believe, or something along that line, and it doesn't particularly bother me that people would go back and forth. In fact, with our dropping birth rate, I think we probably need a very large number of migrants to care for our ageing population. However, this does seem to be the focus of it, because migration is such a gigantic political issue, and I don't feel that we're talking about... I mean, realistically, there are problems with the EU, some substantial things that probably do need reform and discussion. It feels like there's very little attention on those, and this is very much a sort of issue which is being posited around immigration rather than really kind of thinking about a wider picture.
And yet some of the positive elements you're talking about do come through in the Telegraph, don't they, up the top there? A story actually broken by our city editor Mark Kleiman this morning, I think, that at least 80 of Britain's biggest businesses are poised to come out in favour of staying in the European Union. And even though the migration issue, the external borders issue is massive, most people think that it will come down to whether or not we would be better off being in or out of the European Union when people come to vote in June or whenever this referendum might be.
Well, I think that's something we do have to think about. I mean, effectively, the fact people want to come here is a sign of a healthy economy. And of course, businesses want the right to trade. And I mean, it's very unstable to leave the EU. We don't know what will happen to us outside it. So it doesn't really surprise me that you've got a lot of business leaders who are concerned about what will happen.
Well, I think that the fact that, you know, a load of business fat cats want to stay in the EU for their own reasons doesn't necessarily mean that it's for the good of the country. And I find it quite extraordinary that you can dismiss the people's, you know, concerns about this huge influx of migrants from the Middle East and from Africa into Europe over the last year or two as just people moving back and forth, and yeah, there are some Brits abroad and so on. It's not about that. There were 60,000 migrants who came into Europe last month alone. This is a huge problem. 1.1 million migrants have come into Germany last year. This is a vast problem, and people all over Europe are deeply concerned about this and what it means for their jobs and for their economy and for their safety in some cases.
But Jake, there are two separate issues here.
This isn't necessarily to dismiss this as scaremongering. It's to deny the concerns of ordinary people, and it inflates the debate into an irrational sphere. I think we need to take people's concerns seriously and act on them, not dismiss them as being just people moving back and forth.
The problem with what Jake's just said is he's completely conflated two issues, one of which is the free movement of people inside Europe. It's a very different question from what we do about things like the refugee crisis outside Europe, which actually isn't something the EU is in control of anyway. So I do think we need to have a little bit of clear thinking about what the difference is between those two things.
The Schengen Agreement allowing the really free movement of people has allowed the migration.
But we're not part of the Schengen Agreement.
No, indeed we're not.
So that doesn't affect us anyway.
Well, I mean, luckily, as we are an island and we have only a limited connection with Europe, we're free from some of the ructions that are taking place in Europe as a result of the influx of refugees. And I've been covering that quite a lot over the past few weeks and seen with my own eyes the influx of refugees and migrants and what it's meant, the rise of the far right, the rise of populism, you know, areas developing where you know, there are almost 100% migrant in areas like around Malmo and around Paris and around Brussels. And there are serious problems with integration, not with necessarily immigration, but with the speed of immigration. And those problems are bringing Europe down at the moment. There's no political unity, and we are tied to
But those problems are also outside
Europe.
the European economic area, and it's not actually something the EU can control, the fact that the Syria crisis is happening. And the problem is, again, you do seem to be conflating the problem of movement within Europe with the problem of influx from outside of refugees. And I do think those are separate issues. And in fact, we might be in a much better position to realistically negotiate our way through the current gigantic refugee crisis, and I don't diminish that whatsoever, if we have European partners with whom we can actually come to some accommodation.
Just a final look at how the papers are dealing with this, because obviously this is ongoing. I mean, it could well be that everything's pushed back tomorrow. You know, talk of a cabinet meeting for tomorrow afternoon, you know, and a big rally by grassroots out. That might all get postponed. We don't know, do we? But this is your last chance. EU leaders tell Britain, try to insert a last chance clause so that we can't reopen discussions. The Guardian also talking about that as well this evening. Their headline, Cameron has one chance to strike an EU deal. And is it now or never? Because David Cameron said earlier, didn't he, that, you know, he will wait till he gets the right deal, but he's desperate for this to be in June.
He is desperate for it to happen. He's desperate to come back with this package now. I mean, he's saying that he's not going to come back with a half-baked deal, but he's going to wait and go back again, if need be, in a couple of weeks' time until he gets the deal that he wants. Because he has to say that, because he needs to come across as somebody who's driving a hard bargain. Whereas basically, as we all know, he's going to be campaigning for us to remain in the EU. He's a veteran of referendums. Let's not forget that he's been through the Scottish referendum and the alternative vote referendum and been successful in both of those. So he knows what he's getting into, and he knows how to play the game. And he is going to be campaigning to stay in the EU, come what may. OK. Lots more on that to come throughout the evening and tomorrow, if you want. Still to come, though, Donald Trump goes from winning to sinning. Find out more in just a moment. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me this evening, Alex von Tunzelmann and Jake Wallis-Simons. Welcome back to both of you. The Pontiff speaking out about Donald Trump in quite an extraordinary intervention, one might say. Well, I mean, I must say I've rather enjoyed this today because, I mean, any story involving Donald Trump is fantastic entertainment. So what the Pope actually said
was that the policy of building walls is not something a Christian would espouse, and he's referring specifically to the very large wall that Donald Trump has threatened to build along the border with Mexico. Donald Trump has sort of taken this in the spirit of the Pope saying that he's not a Christian, and has got very angry and written angry Facebook posts refuting it. So now this is how international diplomacy is being constructed, of course, is with Facebook posts.
Yes, because the Christian vote is so important in the US. He's giving a speech right now in Gaffney in South Carolina ahead of this weekend's vote. Not mentioned it yet, as we understand, but I mean, it's really important to keep on the right side of the Christian vote if you're a Republican candidate, isn't it?
That's right, and particularly for Trump, he's not the evangelicals' choice of candidate, and so for him this is perhaps more damaging than for other candidates like Marco Rubio or somebody like that. But I think that Trump's response was really interesting, because his response to the Pope was to go immediately on the offensive and say, when ISIS comes for the Vatican, you'll wish I was president. Yeah. And it's hilarious that Trump, he's dragged the whole Republican campaign into the gutter by flinging insults every which way, threatening to sue people, and has dragged the whole tone of the debate down. And clearly, even the Pope isn't immune from Donald Trump's invective and vitriolic behaviour. And I think it does say a lot about Donald Trump, maybe not anything that we didn't know already, but it does say a lot more about Donald Trump.
But once again, he's making headlines, and they're free headlines. It doesn't matter if he's a billionaire, he hasn't had to spend anything for this level of publicity.
I mean, to be fair, it is sort of a genius campaign. Much though I don't think he's a genius as a man, he is brilliant as a marketer, and he has managed to dominate this campaign very thoroughly. And I think it won't hurt him with all Christians. I mean, of course, you know, not all American Christians are Roman Catholic, and some of them will not see this as a problem. So I think it will have a kind of interesting impact. But yes, I did love this quote that he came out with about how he's sort of personally going to battle ISIS from the gates of Rome, how very medieval as a historian. Can't wait to see it.
Absolutely. The Sun is in now, exclusive X Factor Cowell acts for flop judge Nick Grimshaw, Caroline Flack out as a presenter. So going on an exclusive they say show business story. But up the top there, Lawrence Lifer could go free in law U-turn. This is something that the Daily Mirror is also going on, this so-called law of joint enterprise, which has been effectively rewritten today by the Supreme Court.
And this is a really fascinating piece of legal sort of meandering and machination. The idea of joint enterprise is that when somebody commits a murder, other people can be accomplices and equally guilty if they've egged them on, or if they've had what's called foresight, knowing what this person was about to do and being complicit in it. And what the judge has said is that foresight alone isn't actually enough. You also need intent. And so it's not enough just knowing that somebody with you, a friend of yours, so I'm looking at you, but I don't mean you.
It's not me.
A friend of yours is going to commit murder, but you also have to have an intent to egg them on. And I think the fear is that this ruling is going to cause a wave of appeals, historic appeals, to come through the gates of the Supreme Court.
How historic does it get? Apparently this came in to stop duelling, so that you can be egged on to go into a duel. I mean, you're going back a bit now, but there we are.
That's right. And it's going to be very costly and very time-consuming to go through all of these. And I suspect that in many of these cases, intent will be provable, and so actually there'll be a lot of unsuccessful appeals coming through. So it won't be quite as sensational as it seems at the moment.
We didn't get to the fact that croissants are flat these days, which is not an EU story, I don't think, is it? But maybe we can do that. Maybe we can do that at 11:30. But Alex von Tunzelmann and Jake Wallis-Simons, good to see both of you. Thank you. Let's catch up now with the weather.